It's SIP episode 124, and tonight we discuss Soren Kierkegaard, Occam's razor. I'm actually serious, we do, and for very good reason, and you're going to want to understand why. And we do it all with Chris Puppione of Puppione Family Wines. SIP episode 124 is here. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Friday, and if it's Friday, SIP happens. So I love saying that because if I were to say the other thing, we'd get censored. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels, a direct-to-consumer company that we founded in 2010 to help small limited production wineries reach a larger wine-loving audience like you. And when we talk about limited production, tonight is a perfect example of that because the wine many of us are drinking they only made 50 cases of it. So some of you will be saying, how on earth does someone make 50 cases of wine and where can I get some? You can get some right here on the Cellar Angels website. So for those of you that have been following along at home, this is SIP episode 124. Many of you have been on over 100 episodes and you know all about the SIP kit. There's a wine in here that's going to be very interesting coming up. So I can't tell you the backstory yet, but there's quite a few connections to this wine. But here's the SIP kit on the Cellar Angels marketplace. You can go grab one of these and then you will be set for the next 4 or so Fridays in a row, depending upon the number of wines and our schedule, to sit down and talk with the winemaker. And we've got a great selection of wines coming up, but you can also buy, if you don't have to get a SIP kit, you can grab any of the wines from the Cellar Angels marketplace. So I mentioned the wine we're drinking this evening is the Volta from Puppione Family Wines, and we're going to get into the family as well. All the appearance, the aromas, the palate, everything you'd want to know about the wine, we're going to learn tonight from the person who made it, the blend, and as I said, 50 cases, not a lot of wine. So before we get to our first guest, I would like to begin with a little news. So this week in wine, there was actually today, we still only have one camera. That's awkward. This week in wine, today, it literally was a run in the bank. And for those of you that saw this movie, oopsie, It's a Wonderful Life, you recognize a run in the bank. Silicon Valley Bank was closed and shuttered today, and they have been the preeminent lender to Silicon Valley. Many venture capital companies that started in Silicon Valley in the tech sector are funded by Silicon Valley Bank. What's unknown to most folks, and by the way, this had a devastating effect today on the stock market, pulled down a lot of other major banks, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Bank of America. All of them got hit because people are very fearful. When a bank gets shuttered, it's not a good sign. 2% of Silicon Valley's bank holdings are with the wine industry. And unfortunately, 97% of those wineries are in California. So it is really scary times right now in the financial industry, the banking industry, and specifically the wine industry as it relates to Silicon Valley Bank. The best thing you can do is buy wine, and not buy wine from the store. Buy wine direct from a winery, buy wine from Cellar Angels, because there's going to be potentially a lot of wineries not able to make payroll because they don't have the funds because the bank has been seized. So that happened today. But also what happened this week was a report that came out on distributors basically not exactly telling the truth with regards to underage acquisition of wine online. So Vinoshipper, a preeminent shipping industry or company out of the wine region of Napa and Sonoma, did a study of over 380,000 purchasers in the last 2 years, and 0.015% were under the age of 21 trying to buy wine. So these distributors are getting laws enacted to prevent underage wine buying online. It's false. It's fabricated. They use the simulation. They didn't even use real data. And they're the ones that are telling folks in Utah, telling folks in Kentucky, telling folks that we don't want direct-to-consumer wines. We do want direct-to-consumer wines. We want you to have the choice to buy wines online and actually support limited production wineries like the one we have this evening. So without further ado, I want to bring in the man who founded this winery because this is going to be near and dear to him, near and dear to us, so he can reach out and say hello to a whole bunch of wine lovers. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Puppione is with us this evening. Chris, thank you for joining us. Good to see you. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Izzy, hello to you. Doug, hello to you. Doug, I believe you're supporting the Minnesota Arts and Life. We have got more guests coming in. That's a doorbell. All right. So I want to go back in time. First of all, when did you find out you had an interest in wine? What age?
I don't know if I found out or as much as I was told. Being Italian, I think you're just told things. I don't think you get to discover them. Yeah, I mean, it was always around, to be honest. And my dad would tell stories about my great grandfather making wines in the basement of the old house in Oakland, California. So yeah, there was that, originally. And then when my grandmother was living in Oakland still by herself, in a neighborhood that had become unsafe, at a certain point. And so when I was younger, we moved her up to Calistoga. And at the time, I remember going, where the hell are we? I mean, it was orchards. It wasn't really vineyards at the time. The number of wineries was still pretty small.
And what year was this?
This was late 1970s. I was 5 years old. And so it's still, there were wineries, but it wasn't like a thing. You didn't really, at least I didn't think a lot of it. And so, but I ended up coming up here to go to undergrad in college. And, it was free to taste in Sonoma when I was going through undergrad. And so, like any good college student, I went out. We called it drinking, not tasting. We would pile a bunch of guys into a van and start at one end of Highway 12 and end up in the square in Sonoma and eat sandwiches from the cheese shop and try to recover enough to drive back to our dorm. And so that was really my first shot at really looking at wine. But I think the moment for me really kind of happened on one of those afternoons where I remember at a certain winery tasting a wine, and I dumped what was left in my glass in the spit bucket. And you would have thought I had cursed the president or the Pope, as far as my buddies were concerned. What are you doing? And I told them I didn't like it, and they said, "So what? It's free," And so
we're not drinking for taste right now, Chris. We're drinking for effect.
Right. Yeah, it was all about volume rather than quality, right? So that was so that's when I realized, gosh, I think I'm trying to discern and have a palate and try to figure this out. And so and from there it just became kind of a hobby of mine. Later on, it became something bigger than a hobby, but pretty young, I started trying to figure out what I really liked.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't go to the pop quiz question, because Chris had a hand in this. The question was Occam's razor philosophy. What is most likely explanation for a wine that tastes too sweet? And the answer, based upon Occam's razor, was C. The winemaker intentionally left residual sugar in wine. And that was Lori. Lori, is Lori on? I don't see Lori. Oh, yes, she is on. Lori, you are a winner, so you will get 100 points deposited in your loyalty account. And by the way, speaking of loyalty accounts, hats off to the 3 individuals that somehow found a square in their account profile that we were testing, and you figured that out on the purchase to apply their points. The program's not even live yet, people. That was pretty impressive. So thank you for that. So Occam's razor, Chris.
Yeah.
Explain.
So, my wife and I are kind of book nerds. Well, not kind of, we are. And so Occam's razor, and we both studied philosophy as well. And so it's something that I came across that was the best way of really trying to appreciate what we try to achieve with our wines. And a lot of people talk about Occam's razor, law of parsimony, and the whole idea of it's futile to do with more what can be done with fewer. And so the idea of if you don't have to, don't. If it does, but I think sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that just because something should be made as simple as possible doesn't mean you're actually making the result is simpler.
Right.
And so that's where we really wanted to get down to this idea of simplicity and purity, and not opting for more is better.
Well, it's a perfect lead into tonight's topic of getting back to the basics of wine.
Yeah,
because and you look at that philosophy with regards to, you know, shaving away things that don't matter or stripping away things that don't matter and just getting down to the basics. And so you almost sound like the accidental winemaker vigneron, because you didn't set out to do this as a vocation or a living or anything like that. And so when you left college, what did you get a degree in, and what were you trying to pursue?
So my undergrad degree was in creative writing. I created the what is still currently the literary magazine at Sonoma State University. And we won a national award the first year. I was a published author, writing poetry, fiction, things like that. But that doesn't make you any money. So I had been an athlete in college, and so I knew quite a bit about sports. And so my first job out of college was being a sports writer. And so that was what I sought to, you know, I thought I could write for the paper and then write my own stuff later. And so that was my first gig.
Very nice. And it's interesting. How long did you write for the paper?
Just a year.
Okay.
Just a year, because my family, I have a family of educators and coaches. And so I call it the family disease, because we all succumb to it. So I ended up leaving sport and being a sports writer, and I became a teacher and a coach for the better part of 15 years.
Now, was there pressure there from the family because you were frowned upon that writing sports wasn't really a vocation and you needed to be an educator? Okay, good.
No, my dad thought it was super cool. I mean, I took him to Raiders games, Niner games, Warriors games. He got to sit and he got to go in the locker room. He thought it was great. So, awesome. I think they were more concerned about me becoming a teacher because they knew what that was like. So
that's a good point. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I do want to introduce the first poll question, because it does have something to do with how Chris got this job. And so it is, hopefully you can all see it. What has Chris once done for $5? Slept overnight on a park bench as a dare, windsurfed naked in San Francisco Bay, had a log rolling competition using 2 wine barrels, stole a friend's car so he could make the pick during harvest. And I owed Alyssa, I think I said hello to you, Alicia, hello, Dahlia, hello. Do we have 2 Alicias on? No, okay. Julie, hello, Karen, hello, Marilyn, hello, MJ, hello, PV, got you. All right, we're going to give this 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. And my guess is the individual who you share a last name with might have one of the accurate votes. A lot of people think you're a kleptomania with stealing a friend's car. Not out, are you?
No, it could be multiple choice here. We could have A and D are both true. No.
So what is the correct answer?
I got my first job out of college because a buddy of mine bet me I would not sleep on a park bench in front of the church overnight. And when I used the newspaper I used to cover myself up with to keep me warm that night, had a want ad for a sports writer in it. So I ended up rolling off the park bench and applying for that job the next morning.
Oh my goodness. And they hired you? Was that
apparently my cover letter was very impressive. I don't really remember it, but I think that was the effects of the night before. So
Well, we talk about getting back to the basics of wine production, and from a philosophy standpoint, technique standpoint, influence standpoint, who have you looked to from a learning perspective, and then why did you decide to really just strip everything down to get back to the basics? And what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, to me, basics means also is kind of like what's essential and what actually means something to you. And so everything that we do with our little brand has a purpose and meaning. So if you're looking at the bottle and the labels, I can quite literally tell you everything from the color to the typeface to the name of the wine to everything, the artwork. All of it has a purpose and a meaning. And so really it's about essentialism. And so when I look at wine and I'm thinking about it from an essential standpoint, what do we really need? And so I don't try to, it's not my job to over engineer. It's not my job to, we're very lucky to work with beautiful, beautiful fruit. So why would I get in the way? And so that's also a big part of it. So in terms of who I look to, I mean, it first started like really those stories my dad would tell me about my great grandfather, who all he had to work with was this giant, I mean, absolutely giant barrel that he had in the basement. And he would put wood slats down that had very small spacing in between them. And the grapes that he would pull off the ox cart that came down the street in Oakland. And he didn't know necessarily what those grapes were, but he would just take as much as he wanted, throw them onto the wood slats, and then he would stomp on them, and the juice would run between the slats of wood. He'd collect that and dump it into the barrel. Then he'd throw a gang of sugar in there to kill and get the fermentation going and drive the alcohol up and, make it sweet, because that was kind of the style. I mean, we're talking about, 19-teens, 1920s. And
Wow.
So that was what he was doing. And so to that, I thought, God, if I could make wine in a way that honored that, to me, the idea of that tradition. So we foot stomp everything we do. And we foot stomp because that's what my great grandfather did. So that's my connection. I see that as a family connection for us. It's, we call it tradition, but, so there's that. I'm very lucky to, have made friends in the industry who really inspire me. Scott Schultz and his wife, Jenny, who have Jolie Lade wines here in West Sonoma County. They make gorgeous, gorgeous wines of all kinds of varieties. And my connection to them led to us being able to make Volta, truthfully. But then, I also worked in imports for a while, and I got to work very closely with my boss there, Greg Castells. He's an incredible guy and has a wicked palate. And we got to find some amazing producers in Europe who literally their idea of a pump over is holding a bucket at the bottom of their tank, filling it up, climbing a ladder, and then hand dumping it over the cap. And I was just like, all right, well, that's about as pure as it gets. And so It's stuff like that really, and the guys I make wine around, even today, Adrian Manspeaker with Joseph Jewell Wines, G.W. Lucier with Lucier Wine Company. Those are guys I get to make wine side by side with those guys, and I get to see what they do, and it fires me up. I think they do great stuff.
So really kind of, I mean, I love the minimalist approach, and it's very authentic. And again, it gets back to the theme of Occam's razor, where you're just distilling things down to its simplest basic format. And like you mentioned earlier, just staying out of the way and trying not to screw it up, quite honestly. Did your grandfather have any idea the type of grapes he was pulling off the ox cart? No.
So I mean, to our understanding, my great grandfather's name was Pietro Puppione. So he and my grandmother Lucia came over with their two small children under the age of 3 from Piemonte in Italy, and settled in Oakland. And they really were at the core of the Italian community in Oakland. And so a big thing to them was maintaining traditions from back home. So much so that my great-grandfather was one of the founders of what's called the Colombo Club, which is the largest Italian men's club in the United States. And yeah, so every Thursday there's about 500 guys who go to the Colombo Club to have an Italian family-style dinner. And it's been going on since 1921. And so you can go to the Colombo Club in Oakland and take Italian language lessons, dancing. They play bocce, they play old card games, sing traditional dances. So
two follow-up questions to that. Is it men only?
So it's a men's only club, but there is a women's auxiliary club. And so the women have their meetings, their dances, their functions and things like that. And we do what's called family dinners once a month. So everybody gets to come, which is really nice. And again, for the dances and all that stuff, of course,
right.
It's mixed company.
And do you have to be Italian?
So part of our charter is to allow a certain percentage of non-Italians to join. The wait list is about 7 years long. And so it's very popular. It's something that it's a very unique experience to say.
No, that's incredible, especially for very much Carmen, some old school she's there. That is super cool.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to launch. Carmen is a connection that Chris and I found out yesterday we had in common, because Carmen is an absolute angel, was a customer of ours way back in the day in Chicago at our wine shop, which is crazy. Then she spent some time out in Sonoma, and now she is trying to survive in Texas. Long story. But poll question number 2.
Yeah.
And anyone besides Chris that can, for extra credit, name the person in the picture. Occam's razor originated via the first and failed prototype from the Dollar Shave Club, a Dutch philosopher, theologian, and friar, an English philosopher from around the 14th century, William of Occam. Other than the tune to Jeopardy, what you can hear is whispering in the background as the studio audience is cheating. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, 1. Well, you all are correct. It is not the Dollar Shave Club failed prototype. However, Chris, do you want to take a stab at this in the theory of the definition?
Yeah. So William of Occam.
Very good.
Yeah. Just spelled differently. Yeah. So, but the guy in the picture.
Anybody want us besides Chris that knows who the guy in the picture is? It is not William of Occam.
It is not.
So, Chris, what are the names of your children?
Thank you, my wife. You're wonderful. So, as I mentioned, we're pretty intentional about everything we do, including the names of our children. So our children's name are Arya and Soren. No, not Arya for Arya Stark or any of these pulp culture things. I taught world literature, and the way we spell our daughter's name actually comes from the Sanskrit, and the definition of her name is precious or noble. So it comes from Eastern philosophy. And then Soren, or Søren, if you pronounce it properly, as the Danes would. But we're in the United States, so we say Soren. The first conversation my wife and I ever had were so exciting that we talked about Kierkegaard. So that was Søren Kierkegaard in the photo, and we named our son after Søren Kierkegaard, but we say Soren.
Dolores, when you started talking Kierkegaard on the first date, were you thinking cheaper or thinking, how do I get out of this date? You can be honest. That is, I don't know many first dates that have a wonderful marriage when the first date is, deep philosophical discussion about Kierkegaard, which is easy to do.
Yeah.
Deeper. He's right. We're both nerds. Love it. All right. So you're pulling a lot of bits and pieces of winemaking technique and styles from neighbors, European import, and you're still doing a ton of writing. What are some of the writing gigs you have today, which kind of allows you to also continue to hone and augment your education and learning?
Yeah, so I didn't start in the wine industry until I left teaching and coaching really full time, and that was in 2012. So I've only been in wine for about 10 plus years, not quite 11 years. I'm because I do love to read and study and really get to know things. I did all kinds of certifications, took coursework, all that kind of stuff. But I think when it comes down to it, I think for me, I'm painfully curious, I guess. I ask a lot of questions. And so
I think curiosity is literally one of the most invaluable traits we can have.
Yeah. So I think for me, I wanted to see what everybody does. And so I'm definitely the guy who's tapping shoulders and asking questions. And I don't have a problem doing that. And so I think that's been really helpful, that I'm not afraid to sit there and say, I don't know, but you do. Can you tell me?
Right.
I don't really carry a whole lot of ego with this. I just want to make stuff that I like and that my wife likes. And if everybody else does, cool.
Right. Added bonus. Well,
yeah.
How did the wine, or how did the family wine get started? Tell me the story about you deciding, hey, let's start doing this.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I was never one of those kids who, I never had I want to be this job when I grow up. And I love telling this story because it's true, but it actually speaks to directly where this all comes from. I was in second grade, and the school assignment from my teacher was to write about what you wanted to be when you grew up. And so I was very proud. I felt I was kind of like Ralph in A Christmas Story. I wrote the best paper ever, and I took it to school and I gave it to my teacher. And I thought, wow, she's going to be blown away. She's going to think I'm just the best, because what I wrote about is that I wanted to be my dad. And so I wanted to be just like my dad. I wanted to coach my kids' soccer teams. I wanted to cut roses out of the yard and put them on the bed for my wife to find and be so just amazed, throw surprise parties and do do these cool dad things that I saw my dad doing. And my teacher a couple days later gave everybody back their papers, and mine said, "See me." And I went up, and I'm 7 years old, and my teacher says, "You need to do this again. You didn't do it right." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "I want to be my dad." She said, "Well, so do you mean you want to be a teacher or a principal?" And I said, "No, I want to be my dad." And so she said, "Well, that's not what the assignment was." I said, "Yeah, it was. You said, what do I want to be when I grow up?" And so I walked away. I was done with the conversation. She tried to reprimand me, and I was sent to the office because I threw a fit. My mother was teaching at the school and came down to try to calm me down, and I refused. And so I actually got my first 0 on a school assignment at the age of 7 because I refused to write something different. So really, my whole life, I wanted to be a dad. And so I didn't get married until I was 41. I didn't get to have a child until I was 43. And so when my wife was pregnant with our daughter, I literally wanted to bottle the moment. Like, it just like, this is the culmination of everything I've ever wanted. And I need to make sure we get to come back to this time and again. And so the best way I could think of to do that was to make a wine. And so without asking for my wife's permission, which I don't recommend, thankfully my wife is very cool and understanding, I went out and I made sure I could make wine at a local winery that I could custom crush at. I purchased 1 ton of Syrah fruit from an organic vineyard in our neighborhood. And on the day of the pick, I pretended that my car broke down next to a vineyard and tried to get my 7-month pregnant wife to come pick me up. And she reminded me not so delicately that this is why we have AAA and you're on your own, sucker. And so I felt like she's totally blowing the surprise.
Exactly.
And so I convinced her to come down and pick me up, and I greeted her with pruning shears, and thankfully she played along and clipped a bunch of fruit, threw it in the bin, turned around, took a selfie, and she went home. But that's how we got started.
Oh, that's awesome. Mission Control is going to turn on cameras should you be so inclined to want to visually visit with Chris. Not so he can see you, really, because you can all see him anyways. The winemaking philosophy, we talked a little bit about the influences.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about stripping back the basics, getting back to the basics with regards to vineyard sourcing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you have America's playground of vineyard sourcing there, but you also said you wanted to make an unbelievable wine to capture the moment of finally being, living up to your dream of wanting to be a father.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you decide on the type of wine you wanted to make? And then where did you go for that vineyard?
Yeah. So that first wine, the first wine Dee and I really enjoyed together, that was like our wine situation, was a Syrah. And so I knew it had to be that. And so that was number one. Number two, I wanted to work with somebody who really had their own story and doing their own thing. And so I stumbled across the Odyssey Vineyard, and it was being farmed by a woman by the name of Margaret Chastain. The last name may sound familiar. Her niece is Jessica Chastain, the actress.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But Margaret was just a cool chick who really dug Syrah. And so she had 3 acres of organically farmed Syrah in her backyard. And she was just somebody who was cool to hang out with. And she really loved her vines. It was like an old Italian guy who loves his tomatoes and his peppers. She loved her Syrah grapes. And so she did it all herself. And so the purity of that and the simplicity of that really appealed to me. And so that's how we started.
That's incredible. And Syrah spoke to you from very early on? Yeah.
I mean, look, I probably was like everybody else at a certain point where I thought I was supposed to like Cab or I was supposed to like Pinot. But I remember the first time I had Syrah. And I put my nose in the glass, and the meatiness and the bacon fat and the pepper and all of that just hit me. And I was like, well, hell, I didn't know it could be like this,
Mm-hmm.
So it was one of those, it kind of changes your religion in a moment. And so that was very impactful to me. And so, it's not one that gets all the fanfare and the love, right? So it was really cool to have that moment.
And I think you mentioned bacon fat. To me, that is still one of the, and for me, like one of those top 5 experiences where you smell bacon fat and you're like, how on earth am I smelling bacon fat in here?
Yeah.
It's incredible, especially well-made Syrah. And obviously this is one of them. I'm going to show this bottle because you mentioned that you know everything about the type, the font, the color, the picture. But the first thing I want to know is the name Volta.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So 2021 with the Volta, it was the first time. So I taught literature. And so in Italian poetry, Volta means change of scenery or turning point. And so 2021 was both a turning point and this wine a change of scenery for us. Turning point because 2021 was the first year that all 4 of us, my wife, my daughter, and my son, all had a hand in making those wines, or I should say foot. So everybody got their feet on these wines. And that's our final 4. We're not going for a 5th. So we're done. And so that was really kind of a big thing for us. as far as a turning point. Change of scenery. It was the first time we went and got grapes outside of Sonoma County. So all our wines up until the Volta had all been Sonoma County fruit. And so we went outside of Sonoma County for the first time to make the Volta.
And when you go outside of Sonoma County, you have a lot of options. And I'm curious what you wanted to make, where you came out to the decision and conclusion, okay, well, if we're going to make that wine or wine of that blend, we have to go somewhere else. So what were you after? And then how did you pick the vineyards?
Yeah, so up here, finding Grenache and Mourvedre is really challenging. Certainly Grenache and Mourvedre that's farmed in such a way that really appeals to us. And so luckily, again, I get to know some really cool people and really, really generous and kind people. And so Scott and Jenny Schultz, we're working with 2 vineyards in the Chalone AVA, which is up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And and these 2 places are, I mean, if there's a Vatican for Grenache and Mourvedre lovers, these 2 vineyards are the place where you would visit and worship, as far as growing just beautiful, pure Grenache and Mourvedre, Brousseau and Rodnick farm.
And what about them makes them so esteemed and so perfect for Mourvedre and Grenache?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, first it comes down to the farming itself. I mean, to have organically farmed Grenache and Mourvedre. Look, I'm not a religious zealot or anything like that, but when you see somebody invest that kind of time, care, and money, quite frankly, to farm in that manner, that's huge. But then also what you get off of those sites in terms of a purity of fruit expression, the spice and the minerality in particular that comes with that, to us, and it's also nice. It's really powerful flavor profile, but lean. The alcohols are not driven up, and that can happen really easily with Grenache and Mourvedre. Right. Most of our wines are 13% or lower in alcohol. I think I've only made 1 wine that's ever been more than that. So that again is something that, because for us, it's wine and food. And if the alcohol is too high, it's going to blow your food out. And that's how we feel. So,
well, it's funny because when I was doing the research on your vineyard sources and learning about the Chalone AVA and where it comes from, and specifically the Rodnick farm, I was captured by the Rodnick puppies. So I didn't know if that was one of the reasons why it drew you to them for the namesake. But this little guy is going to be formidable. Look at those nails.
Right?
That is insane. But the Rodnick farm is something special. And I do want to kind of show folks where it is. So we will get to some Google Earth. Maybe. It's my first time on Zoom. There we go. Okay. So for those of you that are new, Carmen, we focus on these 2 areas, Napa and Sonoma at Cellar Angels. Partly because when we owned a wine store in Chicago and we're asking the distributors, why don't you have this wine? Why don't you have XYZ wine? And the answer was always, those folks are too small. We're not going to carry them. Very sad, because 90 some odd % of the wineries in Napa and Sonoma produce under 10,000 cases. 95 produce under like 5,000 cases. So there's a lot of great wine that never hits the market simply because the distribution channel won't carry them. I get it, but we decided to solve this problem in 2010 and started a business to make certain that wine lovers around the country had access to these small family-run wineries. Now, Chris has spoken elegantly about the farming techniques, the way the caring of the grapes has been practiced at a lot of the vineyard sources that he talks about and sources from. And it reminded me what we've talked about a lot with regards to chefs. And so when you look at the French Laundry, and not just the French Laundry and Mr. Keller's conglomerate of businesses, but any great chef is very, very particular about where they get their ingredients. This is their masterpiece, their magnum opus. And the French Laundry has gardens right across the street. These aren't the entire gardens that produce all the produce for the French Laundry. They get most of their stuff from the Hill family garden that we'll talk about in a couple months. But it's very important. And when you have 50 case production, you want to make certain the ingredients are absolutely pristine and perfect and farmed in a manner that is respectful to what you're after. And so tell me how you know the Marimar estate.
Yeah, so Marimar is about, I don't even know if it's 15 minutes from our house by country road. And so my wife, she worked for Marimar. She was Marimar's right hand for several years. And she ended up leaving Marimar Estate because we started having children. And so, things kind of changed there. And but we've always had such a great relationship with Marimar and her daughter, Christina. And Tony Britton was their longtime cellar master and winemaker. And now Taylor's there. And they were good enough to reach out to us a few years ago because Tony knew that I was making a little bit of Syrah, and they have Syrah on that site. Marimar's probably more well known for her Albarino, but also for her Pinots and Chards.
Wow.
And but they have a really nice stretch of Syrah there. It's beautiful, cool climate, hillside. It's everything you would want in a cool climate Syrah site. And they didn't have anybody who was going to make it, and they didn't want to make it anymore. So they reached out to me, and I said, well, Tony, I'd love to, but I can't really do a lot with 10 tons of Syrah. I'm not that big. We don't make that much. But thankfully, I was able to return the favor to my buddy Scott and Jenny and said, hey, since you're helping me get this beautiful Grenache and Mourvedre from Chalone, how about you take the balance of this fruit from Marimar? And so Scott and I share the Syrah fruit from Marimar Estate, farmed organically. And, we work really closely with the team there. They let us call the pick. They thin that vineyard down to just 2 clusters per shoot. And
wow.
The Syrah that we get off of that is, quite frankly, it was the first big boy contract, I call it, that I ever signed, in making wine. Everything else I had done to that point was a handshake or a hello. But I signed on the dotted line because I did not want anybody else to get this stuff. So thankfully we've locked it in, and they've just been really good to us.
Well, and both the next 2 vineyard sources were new to me, and obviously they're much further south. But I did some research on these, and I encourage folks to just kind of go to the Brousseau Vineyards website and look at some of their videos, because we talk a lot in Sonoma, where Chris is, about Petaluma Gap and the wind that comes in and the fog that comes in. There's some great fog elements here, but these hillsides and this terracing and this vineyard and the rolling, it's incredible, the different slopes and magnitude they have. And it's not valley floor fruit, so this is up in the hills. And again, farmed organically. Tell me a little bit about what drew you to this and why it's so magical.
Truthfully, it was tasting Scott and Jenny's wines. They really having exposure to the different and of different varietals. They've made different wines with fruit from both of these sites. And, I know that for Brousseau, you get mad street that down, with people who know what they're talking about as far as that vineyard site, and Rodnick as well. And so it was really just by virtue of nothing short of, wow, this tastes really good. Where is it from?
Yeah, and the Rodnick property is insane. If this had snow on it, it would be a ski resort with the sloping hills, because it's right up against the National Mountain Park. Pinnacles, or what, I can't remember what the name of it was.
Is it? Yeah.
But it is an incredible stretch of property. And the farmer, and you probably know this as well, Chris, he's been farming this property for 40 plus years. He wins awards for how well he takes care of the vineyard workers and taking care of them with regards to things outside of the vineyard. Just a terrific gentleman, Mr. Rodnick, and the owner of those puppies I showed you earlier. But this fruit is highly sought after. And we talk about it often at Cellar Angels with regards to how people in the wine industry elevate each other. And Chris just shared a perfect example about, he doesn't have the fruit contract, but a friend of his has the fruit contract. And so they were able to do some horse trading and say, I'll give you, some of the Syrah. Can I have some of the Grenache and Mourvedre? And luckily we're thankful for that horse trading because it's in this bottle. So I'm a little bit excited about this. And I would love to have you walk us through kind of the aromas, flavors, and your pairing of the 2021 Volta.
Yeah, sure. So, we're big fans of just Rhone wines in general. And so the idea of being able to make a GSM was really important to us. And again, having access to this fruit, tough to beat. Yeah. So this wine is, it's 100% whole cluster. So we did not destem any of the fruit, Grenache, Mourvedre, or Syrah. So all whole cluster, all foot tread. And so that stem inclusion and using the whole cluster as well means you get a little bit of the carbonic stuff. So it really gives that burst of fruit, the spice and nuance aromatically coming from the stems really helps a lot as well. We think that's really important. And as far as the finished wine goes, to us, there's the aim really is just for purity of expression. We really just want to see a purity of fruit. And so the idea is we want the red fruit out of that Grenache. And so that a little bit of that raspberry note, we want some of that, cherry and even a little bit of that rose petal kind of aromatics. And then the Mourvedre and the Syrah bring color and spice, certainly texture to the wine. And for me, I love to go on my back deck and use my Traeger and to use I have 3 different barbecues on the back deck and a smoker. And so to me, it's about doing things like barbecue pulled pork sandwiches, doing smash burgers, doing things like that. And so to me, I wanted a wine like that. I wanted a wine where I'm going to sit there and I'm going to have the world's best cheeseburger with a killer wine that's going to accent those flavors. And so whether it's rack of ribs or anything like that, yeah, all of the above.
All of the above. And how do you keep the alcohol so low?
Yeah, so the alcohol is just by virtue of pick date. So we tend to pick on the earlier side. So it's during harvest, it really just comes down to being very attentive as we get closer and closer. And this is the part the kids love, to be honest with you. Most of our pictures leading up, in July and August are the kids just slamming grapes into their faces, walking through the vineyards. And so they're helping. That's what they tell me. They're 5 and 2. Helping, Daddy, helping. And
you're
so,
like, you're destroying the yield, kids. You're destroying the yield.
Yeah, helping, Daddy. But really, it's going through and tasting. And for me, I'm looking at everything from the thickness of the skins to the acidity to really just the physiological ripeness. And I'm trying to make sure I have the fruit there. I want to get, depending on what we're looking to do, how much of the green note versus how little, herbaceousness versus fruit. And so, you can do things like looking at the seeds and stuff, but that doesn't always tell you everything. Looking at the color of the stems still doesn't really tell you everything. And so there's really no substitute for just walking through and tasting them. And so
how do you balance kind of that minimalist back to basics? I don't want to do much manipulation with, okay, this might be, I might need to do something here. I might need to add.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'd say is we're pretty lucky so far. We haven't had to do a whole lot, which is good because I'm not that smart. But the second part is that, you know, we do get to acquire really great fruit. So we work with people that are so attentive that it really helps us. That being said, like I said, we're not religious about it. Like we want to use, you know, we want to, if we don't have to, we won't, is basically the thing. But if we do need to, then it's our job. We see it as our responsibility to help the wine. It's not, I don't even think we think of it as like helping the consumer, because to be honest, we haven't even been selling wine for a year. We've been making wine for 6 years, but we didn't start selling our wine until 11 months ago.
Oh, wow.
So we have never really thought of it as an end consumer thing. It was more like, it's our job to help this wine see itself through, kind of like, it's almost like parenting. You know, it's not for anybody else. It's for them. It's for their sake. So we kind of usher the wines along that way. So, you know, what does that look like? It needs a little nutrients during fermentation because the vineyard was low in potassium, you know, or you know what I mean? It's like stuff like that. But no, you'll never see us adding mega purple or whacking it with a bunch of God knows what. I mean, that's just not us.
No,
but that's why. But that's also why we work with the growers we work with, so we don't have to do that. So it's really easy for me to sit here and say we don't have to do much. It was like, well, we pay for it,
right? Exactly.
Get the fruit we get.
Well, I have to imagine logistically timing things with pick. How far of a drive is it down to Chalone and getting grapes back up to Sonoma? I mean, all that's got to factor into some of the decisions as well. Yes or no?
That was completely relying on Scott and Jenny being awesome. I mean, you know, and they share a lot of the stuff we do is very similar. It's been really fun to, you know, we're both making Syrah from the same vineyard, and they foot stomp theirs, we foot stomp ours. We use different vessels maybe sometimes, but to sit down with them and taste these wines and sit there and turn to Scott and go, well, I like yours better. And he goes, well, I like yours better. Okay. You know, like, you know, and so it's kind of fun that just these little tiny decisions that you make can really change things. So it's really fun.
I mean, I think I love the fun part of it. I also think it has to be a little bit daunting because you don't get to make that decision again until next year. And then, so that part scares me a little bit. It's like, okay, we might have got that one marginally okay, but we've got to figure out how to dial it in and fine tune it. And then we've got to wait, 12 months before we can make that decision again. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's, but again, I still point that back to raising kids too. I might screw them up too, but I'll try to fix it in the meantime.
That's a good point. It's a very good point. Wish I could have done that decision over again, Soren. Sorry about that. All right, consumers, angels, I think it's actually good that we should get back to the basics of wine consumption. So we talk about this a lot, drink the wine you like. It doesn't have to have 98 points. It doesn't have to have 10 gold medals. You don't have to have a $90 wine stem to enjoy the wine. I've had some very good wines out of red solo cups. But you can strip things down to basics from a consumer standpoint as well. And I recommend doing that this weekend. So spend a little time with great company, great food, grab a bottle that you're in love with. Even if it's $12, those are the best wines, quite honestly, because you can laugh all the way to the bank. And I think the secret of genius is focus. So focus on who you're with, focus on the wine, focus on the conversation. I'm not going to promise marriage or anything, but if you're talking Kierkegaard and it's a first date, stranger things have happened. So keep that in mind. Chris, how do people come taste with you?
Yeah, couple different things. So, one, if you're out here in, Napa, Sonoma area, things like that, especially if you are doing Airbnb and stuff like that, we do in-home tastings at Airbnbs when people come to town. We find that kind of fits our style. So we don't have a traditional tasting room. If you don't have an Airbnb, we've had folks just out on our back deck here at the house, and we line up the wines and knock them out. And, the kids may or may not be in the background if they get out of the closet, but it's pretty fun. And so those are usually the ways we do that. And then we're also looking to expand and take the winery on the road. We're talking about doing it twice a year going forward, where we'll pick an area, so they say like Houston, Texas, or Chicago, and we'll let folks on our contact list know, hey, we're going to be in your area for these 3 days. Would you like to do a tasting experience, things like that?
Right.
And we book those.
Okay, perfect. So anybody heading out to wine country, specifically the Sonoma region, wine country is a pretty broad term, but we'll narrow it to Sonoma. A lot of houses for rent. That would be great to have the winemaker owner come to your house and taste through the portfolio, taste through wines, have some great food. You may or may not be sleeping on a bench that evening. It all depends on how much wine is consumed. But I love where you're going and what you've accomplished so far in such a small period of time. Let me ask you 2 questions in closing.
Sure.
These are the essay questions, which I didn't prep you about.
Oh, okay.
What advice would you give 22-year-old Chris?
Oh, geez. You know what? I can honestly say that I probably wouldn't warn him too much, because a little suffering is healthy. So I think that's good, and I've ended up exactly where I need to be. So it wouldn't be to give any warnings. I think I would just stick with it would probably be it, because there were plenty of times where I didn't want to, depending on the situation, but I did. And don't be afraid to change your mind, which is thankfully something I haven't been afraid to do. I've been able to do a lot of things in my life because I wasn't afraid to change my mind. And so just to encourage that. Awesome.
And then lastly, if you could share a glass of your wine with one person, living or dead, who would that be and why?
My grandfather and my great grandfather, who I didn't get to meet either one of them, Valentino and Pietro Puppione. Are you sure they're Italian? Yeah, I would love to have a glass with those 2 guys, and let them know that my dad did a hell of a job. I think that would make my dad happy, and it certainly would make me happy.
No, that's outstanding. 2 great answers. Chris, cannot thank you enough for spending some time with us. I know you've got dinner plans. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. And Dee, I know I can't call you Dee because I actually have a D, so she's looking at me right now, mission control. But thank you for popping on and helping with everything. Next week, Sipsters, there is actually no sip because for the wine club members, it's Meet the Winemaker. And we were going to have the folks from Spicy Vines on, and looking forward to that, to see Crystalline and Doug, who are amazing people. And then in 2 weeks, March 24th, my birthday, bring it on. We're going to have Elise Nearlove on from Elkhorn Peak, and it is going to get wild. So all of you, I encourage you to spend some time this weekend, like we talked about, getting back to the basics of wine consumption. Call someone special, sit down with someone special, have some good food. Doesn't have to be crazy. Peel back the hyperbole and just enjoy. Be good to one another. Can't do this without you, and can't do it without dedicated winemakers like Chris. So thanks so much for all you do. We will see you in 2 weeks. Cheers, everyone. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dolores.
Thank you all. Have a great night.